Hi, it's Craig and Richard here for our Week 5 feedback session. And this week we've been exploring communication, relationships, all the human aspects of what it means to be mindful. So we've had some very interesting feedback and questions which we'll try and address in reasonably concisely so that we don't go over time as we have done in some weeks. So Richard, would you like to speak first about the importance of listening? How can we listen more attentively?
Absolutely. So paying attention when we're talking, when we're listening to people is a good start, you know. The habit that a lot of us have is to be on automatic pilot when we're listening. So we're talking to someone but maybe thinking of something else or distracted, and so to actually listen is a very important thing.
I think too that that happens on quite an unconscious level. We think we're listening, but we're not actually really listening. We're sort of in the background, got a very almost subliminal conversation with ourselves. So it's not as easy as we think to really listen mindfully.
No, it's very much a practice. So it's something that people can practice. So we'd encourage our learners to actually really make that into a practice to listen mindfully when they're talking to people.
And also issues around our speech being more engaging. And I think one of the important things if we want somebody to pay attention to what we're saying is firstly, if we're paying attention, not to speak to somebody who's not paying attention. Like if they're doing something else or multitasking, just wait till they're actually paying attention to us, otherwise come back later. But the other thing is actually to pay attention when we're speaking ourselves, to be interested in what we're exploring, to be interested in the topic. And very often that interest and engagement, if it's happening quite naturally, will, without us trying to do anything, we'll just draw more interest from other people. But if we're not interested, if we're not really paying attention, then that's actually what we're going to be communicating to somebody else.
Absolutely. And of course, if people are dominating conversations, you know, sometimes that's an issue, and some of our learners raise that. You know, if somebody's really refusing to listen or somehow dominating the conversation, you know, again, I guess in the first instance, we probably need to practice just some basic mindfulness to calm ourselves down and not react. We might want to embody mindful listening. I mean, sometimes just the embodiment of it can really make a difference. But sometimes we might need to just end the conversation or just say, look, I'll come back later when you're less distracted or better able to listen to what I'm saying.
Yes, because sometimes if there are other things we need to be doing and the conversation's going nowhere, it's, you know, sometimes it's most appropriate to direct our attentions where they might need to be.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Relationships is an important issue as well. And the challenge, that fine line between being compassionate and accepting somebody's behaviour, perhaps when that behaviour is not necessarily very appropriate, or wanting to change somebody else. Now, we can't change somebody else. We have to really start with ourselves. But very often when we're trying to impose change on somebody else, then what we're actually doing is sometimes embedding resistance and fortifying resistance. So speaking as a doctor, for example, you know, you can try and impose change on a patient, and it often sort of works in the opposite way. And from a motivational point of view or from a point of view of engagement, it's generally far better to ask questions, to inquire, to be interested and to engage with a person. And ask questions in such a way that a person might see for themselves what's getting in the way of making a constructive change or what the self-sabotaging behaviours are. And this is not asking questions from a point of, if I ask questions then they'll change, because that very subtly communicates itself in the conversation, but to inquire and ask questions in such a way that a person may see for themselves. Because if a person doesn't see for themselves, they might do something just to shut us up or keep us happy, but they haven't really taken on board the change. Or when somebody's being perhaps very inappropriate, saying something that's very rude or abrasive. I think the Serenity Prayer has got a lot of wisdom in
Absolutely.
it, you know, sort of...
It's a mindfulness prayer, really, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And, you know, to know when we need to speak and to say something, or to know when we need to keep our peace, or just be accepting of a situation the way it is, and to be able to tell the difference between those two things. And if we're more mindful, we will recognise. But being mindful and accepting doesn't mean being a doormat for life, you know, because there are times we do need to speak, and sometimes the thing that keeps us from speaking is accepting the fact that we might get perhaps it might, I don't know, in some ways some negative feedback from somebody, or it might take a level of courage to step over our own fears and what it takes to do that. And I think that if people are really accepting, then it tends to actually be a very empowering thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes when we do have to tell people things, you know, to deliver bad news or ask people to be a little bit different, if we can do it without judgment, that can also be a very useful thing too. Just to be very clear and direct at times, but without judgment, without reactivity, maybe speaking from a quieter place in ourselves can be a useful thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now you're going to explore a little bit about encouraging others to be more mindful as well.
Sure, absolutely. So we've talked about that a little bit already, but of course, as you said, being the change is so important. One of the most common questions I get when I'm talking to parents particularly about mindfulness is, how do I get my kid to be more mindful? This is one of the number one questions, and my answer is usually to be more mindful yourself. I mean, if you go home after work and you ask your kid how their day was and you really listen to the answer, they're going to pick up on that and they're going to start, just connecting a little bit more with you and probably with their siblings and other people. So sometimes really being the change is a very powerful way of getting people to be more mindful.
So modelling it, being an example of it.
Absolutely, yeah, modelling it, yeah, being it in each moment.
In as much as we can. I always like to console myself with the thought, wherever possible, I try and be an example of mindfulness, and when I'm not an example, I'm a warning. This is what will happen to you if you're not mindful. So I always console myself with that in my less than mindful moments.
Yeah.
There are some questions in relation to meditation. For example, can our minds ever be empty? And what about complete stillness? And one of the most frustrating and difficult things is when we're trying to empty the mind, we're trying to stop the mind, almost like we're becoming a wrestler and I'll try and pin the mind to a mat and stop it thinking. Yeah. Or we're trying to empty the mind and another thought comes in and we get reactive to it. So what that actually does, if we pay attention, is it accentuates the thinking. And generally there's another layer of thinking about, why can't I stop thinking? So what do? Well, doing less tends to be better. And that is, just accept the fact that thoughts will come into the mind, sometimes more, sometimes less. But if the thoughts come in, but we're just practicing the ability to stand back from them with non-attachment to them, non-judgment, not reacting, not even thinking they shouldn't be there, then it makes it easier to be less disturbed or moved by the thought as it comes and goes. And so there's a kind of a stillness that's underneath the thinking. And if we learn to sort of come to rest in that, then we're not perpetuating and adding to the thinking, and the mind may settle itself down over time. Like how do you get the dog, with the ball in its mouth to stop running? We're sort of chasing the dog, trying to get the ball back. And of course, the more we chase the dog, the more it runs. Generally, it's holding the ball and just teasing us with it as it stays one step ahead. And in a way, just learn to sit on the park bench. And the dog will run around for a while, but eventually it'll come and sit at our feet and drop the ball. And I think the mind's a little bit like that.
Yeah, I'd add to that, there's a fine line between letting things be or letting go of things and pushing them away. And quite often when people are meditating in the beginning, they think that they're letting go of their thoughts, but there's actually a subtle resistance that's there.
Yes.
And we end up, of course, if you try not to think of something, you're not putting your attention on the thought. And so, of course, it sticks around and becomes louder. It's like trying to not hear a noise, not listening to a car alarm going off outside. Well, your attention's very much caught up in it.
Like that distractor influence thing, the very thing we're trying not to notice is the thing we become hypervigilant for.
That's right, yeah. Another thing that came up around meditation was people noticing that the moment they bring their awareness to their breath, their attention to their breath, it automatically changes it. And that's a very common experience, actually. And of course, we're giving this invitation to allow the breath to happen naturally, to not feel like you need to deep breathe or to breathe any particular way. But the moment people notice it, it does change it. So I'd actually encourage a bit of curiosity. Just be interested. How does it change it? Have the intention to allow the breath to happen naturally. Very often when people have done some yoga or the other breathing exercises, they think they need to breathe deeply or something like that, and that's not really the point. The point is to use the breath as an anchor, so to let it happen without trying to control it, without thinking about it, as a way of just becoming present and just doing that as best we can.
And engaging with the tactile experience of feeling
That's
the breath.
Right.
And if it changes, then just noticing the change. And it is likely to change. In fact, it often does. If we do settle, the breathing may well settle. But not because we're trying to manipulate it. Some people feel quite stressed with the breath or short of breath if they think, I've got to keep the breathing very slow and quiet, and they're trying to impose something rather than just letting the breath find its own depth and rhythm. Yeah. Tune in our head and white noise in our mind and so on. It's very hard to get stuff out of our head, and it comes back to, I think, what we were saying before of trying to get rid of this stuff where we're becoming hypervigilant. And that's very different to just letting the tune be there or letting the white noise or letting the thought be there, but being less interested in it. You could use another metaphor if you like. I hope you don't mind all our metaphors. I think in metaphors all the time. But it's like if we're tuning into a radio station all the time, and lots of people are, then the ratings go up and it gets more attention. But if you stop tuning into a radio station, a program, continually, then pretty soon that program's taken off the air. And it's like that here, I mean, in our mind. If we just tune into that stuff less, even though it's there, we're just interested in something else, then pretty soon it'll diminish by itself, not because we've suppressed it or fought with it.
Yes. Just on self-compassion, some people noticed that they were able to let go of the thoughts or the story that was driving some of their difficult emotional experiences, but that the emotion would just continue to be there, the physical sensations, the fight and flight or the felt experience of that. And that, of course, is totally normal. I mean, when we activate an emotion, it does have an effect in the body that tends to persist much longer than the thoughts. But that's the right approach. Just notice the thinking that's driving that, let it go. And then, of course, it's about being mindful of what we feel in the body, not reacting to it, not trying to get rid of it. And, of course, if it's uncomfortable and there's a sense of discomfort or suffering, that self-kindness, that self-compassion that we're exploring is a really powerful way of relating to that.
Yes, because the preoccupation with it, of course, can just accentuate the interference from it. And so just in closing too, just to perhaps acknowledge a couple of things that have come up, like common humanity was...
Some learners found that idea very useful, actually, because quite often when we're experiencing difficulties and suffering, we tend to feel very alone in that. I mean, most people are doing a very good job of not seeming particularly vulnerable and just kind of getting on with things. And so when it's us that's experiencing some kind of difficulty, we look around, everyone else seems to have their life together.
Comparing ourselves.
Yeah, we get into that comparison, and it's usually pretty unfavourable in those circumstances. So just to recognise that suffering and difficulties and stress and distraction, all these things that we're working with in this course, they're all just parts of, this is part of being human. And to recognise that it's what unites us with others rather than actually something that separates us can be a very powerful thing when we're suffering.
Yeah, I can remember my grandmother saying to my mother, when your children are their least lovable, they need love the most. And I think I tested that a few times in my childhood. So we share these common problems. And the other thing too is just to acknowledge a number of learners saying about unplugging and just enjoying the clear space of unplugging for a little while. And I think it's great if we're getting a sense of, it is not anti-technology, but just starting to be masters of the technology again and how that can help us to engage more fully with our life.
I saw a meme on Facebook a while ago that there's no Wi-Fi in the forest, but you get a better connection, which I think speaks to this really well.
Good. So thank you very much. This is the end of week 5, and we look forward to seeing you again on week 6, and we hope that you enjoy the last week of this program.